Good evening, and welcome back to Wisdom by the Fireside. In today's live story, we explore how a single act of quiet faith can ripple through an entire city, uniting strangers, crossing cultures, and bringing light into the darkest hour. But let me ask you something first. What happens when a peaceful neighborhood wakes up to the sound of war? Not from bombs, but from fear, headlines, and the ache of helplessness. And how far would you go to comfort someone who feels like they no longer belong? Tonight, we tell the story of a vigil that started with one woman's tear and ended with a miracle. It was a Thursday afternoon in June 2025 when the headline broke across every phone, every screen, every waiting room in America. US launches airstrikes on Iranian nuclear sites. In a modest suburb just outside of Ann Arbor, Michigan, Leila stood frozen in the dairy aisle of the local Kroger, her phone shaking in her hand. She'd read it twice, 3 times. Her thumb hovered over the messaging app. She tried calling her mother in Isfahan, then her brother near Tehran, but the calls wouldn't go through. Behind her, a mother scolded a toddler for opening a bag of chips. In front of her, the cashier joked with a teen stocking yogurt. The world kept turning, but Leila's world had stopped. She left her cart in the aisle, walked out with nothing, sat in her car and cried. It wasn't just fear, it was that old, familiar feeling again, the feeling that she didn't belong. Leila hadn't felt this way in years. Not since the early days, when she first moved to Michigan from California with her husband and 2-year-old son. Back then, it was hard enough explaining where Isfahan was. Harder still to say it without hearing something like, "Oh, is that near Iraq?" But that day, this day, it was different. It wasn't confusion. It was cold silence. She sat in her parked car outside the store for nearly 20 minutes, eyes locked on the dashboard, watching the clock but not really seeing it. Her fingers trembled as she finally texted her husband, "Can't reach Mom or Sam. I'm heading home." He responded quickly, "Traffic is awful. Sit tight. I'll meet you there." But the home she returned to didn't feel like home that day. Not when her neighbors avoided eye contact. Not when her son, 12 now, asked her, "Are we gonna get sent back?" She didn't answer. She just pulled him into her arms. Later that evening, as the sun sank low over the trees, she sat on the edge of her bed, with the television casting flickers of red across her face. She wasn't watching the news. She was listening to the quiet. And in that quiet, she whispered a prayer. It wasn't a long one, not eloquent, just, "God, please, let someone care." She had no idea that someone had already seen her tears just hours earlier and was about to change everything. Miles across town, Daniel, the mayor of this quiet Michigan suburb, was finishing a tense phone call with the governor's office. He wasn't a career politician. He used to run a bakery, the kind of man who wore flannel shirts to city council meetings and still remembered your dog's name if he saw you in the park. But that day, the weight of leadership felt heavier than ever. He had spent the afternoon watching the same headlines, the same footage, the same spiraling panic across his community's private Facebook groups. And something inside him stirred, an ache he couldn't ignore. He didn't know Leila personally, but he remembered seeing her once during a school board meeting. She'd spoken softly, nervously, about adding more world history books in the middle school curriculum. So our kids don't feel like strangers in their own classroom, she had said. That stuck with him. So when he saw her sitting alone on a bench outside Kroger earlier that day, wiping her face quietly with a crumpled tissue, he didn't interrupt, but he remembered. That night, after putting his twin boys to bed, Daniel paced in his garage, staring at old campaign signs stacked next to toolboxes and hockey gear. And then, as if answering a question he hadn't spoken aloud, he whispered to himself, "We're not going to sit in silence." He didn't run it by advisors. He didn't call the press. He just pulled out his phone and opened the city's Facebook page. The post was short, no frills, no political language, just a plain invitation. To anyone feeling fear, grief, or isolation after today's events, come to the steps of City Hall tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. Bring a candle, bring a friend, or just bring your heart. We're standing together. Mayor Daniel. It was posted at 9:13 p.m. At 9:27, Leila saw it. She wasn't sure how it found her feed. Maybe a friend of a friend had shared it. Maybe it was God. But something inside her shifted when she read those words. She stared at the post for a long time, like it might disappear if she blinked too fast. Her husband, Ramin, sat beside her in silence. She passed him the phone. He read it, then simply said, "We're going." The next evening came quickly and quietly. Leila had told herself not to expect much. Maybe a few neighbors, maybe some uncomfortable glances, maybe just the mayor and a prayer. But as they turned onto Main Street, she gasped. The steps of City Hall were glowing. Candles, dozens, then hundreds. Flickering flames held in jars, in mugs, in palms, trembling from summer breeze. People of every age and color, teenagers with signs that read, "You're not alone," elderly couples standing with heads bowed, veterans in folding chairs. It was quiet, yes, but not empty. Leila reached for Ramin's hand. Her son clutched her other. And for the first time in 24 hours, she breathed without fear. Mayor Daniel stood near the top of the steps, not in a suit, not behind a podium, just in a light blue shirt, sleeves rolled up, hands loosely clasped before him. He waited a moment longer, letting the silence stretch into something sacred. Then he stepped forward. His voice was calm, unshaken, the kind that could quiet a restless room without raising a decibel. "I don't know what it feels like to watch the country of your birth become a headline, but I do know what it feels like to worry about the people you love." He scanned the faces below him. Some tearful, some curious, some tight with guarded emotion. "I also know this. America is not the land of perfect policies or perfect leaders, but it should always be the land where neighbors show up for each other." There was a pause, a subtle sniffle in the front row. So if you're hurting tonight, if you're afraid for someone oceans away, or if you feel out of place in the country you call home, know this: you are seen, you are loved, and you are not alone. The wind picked up just then, like nature itself wanted to punctuate the moment. And then something extraordinary happened. Leila, standing in the third row with her candle clutched to her chest, raised her hand. She hadn't planned to, but something pushed her. A voice, maybe, or a memory of her mother saying, "Speak kindness, even when it's hard." The mayor nodded to her gently, and she stepped forward. Leila hadn't spoken into a microphone since her college days. Her hands trembled, not from fear of public speaking, but from the rawness of her heart. She stood in front of the crowd, candlelight flickering against her face, and cleared her throat. "My name is Leila. I was born in Isfahan. My mother still lives there. My brother too." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "Yesterday, I couldn't reach them. I still haven't. And for the first time in years, I felt like a stranger here again. Like maybe I didn't belong anymore." There were murmurs in the crowd, a hush of shared breath. But then I saw your candles, and I realized I do belong. Because kindness like this is my home. The crowd stirred. Some clapped quietly. Others wiped their eyes. Then Leila said something that no one expected. Something simple and pure. "In my culture, we believe that light drives out darkness, that even one candle can break despair. Tonight, you gave me 1,000. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. And then an elderly woman stepped forward and wrapped her in an embrace. No words, just arms, just warmth. One by one, others followed. They didn't know Leila. They didn't know Iran, but they knew pain. And they knew love. The vigil, which was meant to last 20 minutes, went on for hours. And just when it felt like the night had offered all it could, the real miracle arrived. Leila's phone buzzed. At first, she didn't notice it, too wrapped in the warmth of strangers, the comfort of flickering light, and soft voices singing old hymns and Farsi lullabies. But it buzzed again, then again. She stepped away, cupping the phone to block the light. Her hands trembled as she read the screen. One missed call. Maman. One new voice message. Her heart stopped. She pressed play. It was her mother's voice. Faint, crackling, but alive. "My sweet girl, I am safe. There was panic, yes, but God is watching over us. I am with your uncle. We are together. I love you. Tell little Daniel not to worry about his grandma." Leila dropped to her knees. Tears flowed. Not from fear, but from relief, so complete, it felt holy. Ramin was at her side, in seconds. Their son knelt beside them. Someone in the crowd asked what had happened, and when she managed to whisper, "My mother's okay," a cheer erupted, not loud, not raucous, but filled with quiet awe. Mayor Daniel stepped down from the top of the stairs and stood beside them. "God heard your prayer," he said. Leila nodded. the tears streaming now. And he sent you. All of you. That night people stayed. Long after the last candles burned down. Long after the news crews packed up. Long after the cold began to nip at fingertips. No one wanted to leave the peace they had made together. By the next morning, photos of the vigil had spread across social media like a quiet wildfire. There was Leila, her face aglow in candlelight. The mayor, hands clasped with an elderly Iranian man. Children holding signs that read, "Light wins." News outlets picked it up. First local, then national. A headline on a popular site read, "In the midst of global tension, one small town chose unity." But for the people who were there, the story was never about headlines. It was about the woman in the bakery who hugged Leila the next day without saying a word. It was about the high school teacher who added Rumi's poetry to next week's English lesson plan. It was about the local florist who handed out free tulips wrapped in tiny scrolls that read, "Peace begins with me." And something changed in the city, not just in how people treated their Iranian neighbors, but in how they treated everyone. Suddenly, eyes lingered a little longer in grocery aisles. Strangers held doors with a smile. Kids asked more questions. Adults answered them with care. The vigil hadn't ended on the steps that night. It had spread, like light always does, into corners of homes, schools, sidewalks, and hearts. And Leila? She began to walk, with her head just a little higher. A few days later, as the world's attention shifted to the next crisis, something beautiful remained behind in that Michigan town. At City Hall, the steps where the vigil had taken place were still stained with melted wax. The scent of spent candles lingered faintly in the air, and taped to the door, someone had posted a note on plain white paper, handwritten in both English and Farsi. It read, "In this place, no one stands alone." Leila walked by that note on her way to the local library the following Monday. She was there to donate 3 children's books, ones she had translated herself over the years so that others could see the poetry, fables, and beauty of her Persian childhood. Inside the library, the clerk looked at her gently and said, "Are you the woman from the vigil?" She nodded, a little shy. The clerk reached into her drawer and pulled out an envelope. "Someone left this for you, no name, just said you'd understand." Leila opened it slowly. Inside was a folded piece of cardstock. It held a single sentence. "God didn't bring you here to be afraid. He brought you here to shine." Beneath it was a small silver pin, shaped like a candle. Her fingers closed around it, and for the first time in years, she didn't cry from pain, but from awe. Because somehow, in a season of darkness, light had found her anyway. The summer moved on, the headlines shifted, but in that quiet Michigan town, people still remembered what it felt like to stand side by side, not because they agreed on everything, but because they agreed on what mattered most. Human dignity, compassion, belonging, and God's quiet hand holding it all together. Leila continued her life with something new, etched into her soul. Not bitterness, not fear, but belonging. A sense that her presence in this country, in this town, in that moment, was not an accident. That prayer doesn't always arrive in the form we expect, but it always arrives. Sometimes it comes through the voice of a mayor. Sometimes it flickers in the hands of strangers. And sometimes it speaks through 1,000 candles lighting up the dark. And so, dear listener, what can we take from this story tonight? That when crisis strikes, you don't have to know the solution. You only have to show up. That empathy is not agreement. It's the courage to say, I see you. You matter. That even in a divided world, unity begins in the heart of one person willing to stand in the gap. Maybe tonight, that person is you. Thank you for being part of our little circle here beside the fire. We hope Leila's story reminded you that no one is ever truly alone, and that sometimes the greatest miracles happen not through grand gestures, but through small lights shared freely. If the story touched your heart, share it with the ones you love. And if you'd like to hear more like it, you know where to find us.